to my paper because I really did not want to read my paper, and since it is a part of a larger, more nuanced, focused research, I really did not want to bring that research into it, but I'll just quickly read what I think can make sense to this Adivasi reason. So my original research is tribal citizen and border thinking in India, but today I think I should present it in form of the Adivasi India and the non-modern thinking in India. Now, in rethinking marginal or the subordinate or the minority, this study engages with the interventions that minoritarian or the marginalized position constantly makes in the modernity of national culture. The practices are evident among these social groups, those social groups who, when confronted with a modernizing drive or modernizing state power, have more often than not produced unpersuaded social behavior like that of the marginalized indigenous in the post-colonial societies. Tribal citizens of India, this paper argues, are negotiating with the modernizing state form from the position of their traditional community knowledge, while they accept the modern category of scheduled tribe status for themselves. Because why I call them modern? Because they consider themselves as the scheduled tribe citizen of India, which is but a modern category, a modern census category, a modern governmental category. Otherwise, they are just like you and me, and they just have their own cultural community. They can be not a scheduled. One friend of mine said that we are scheduled tribe just because the constitution came into existence and it has its 5th schedule and 6th schedule, and we fall in that, our lifestyle practices form in that part of the schedule, and that's why we are called scheduled tribe. So it's just a category, it's a modern constitutional category. It is not our identity. Our identity is our lifestyle practices, our worldview, our belief, our way of life, our way of living. But we still call them the marginal, the primitive, the backward, and we need to mainstreamize them, or we need to uplift them to mainstream. So again, our point of reference is modern, industrial, scientific life, and non-modern, non-rational way of life. So, in defining why they are called marginal, why they are called primitive, why they are called the non-dominant, the minority, as against the modernity of national culture, as against the modernity of dominant culture, the construction of modern nation state gave the cultural community the identity of minority. Because the construction of modern nation states in former colonies following one particular model of imagined community saw progressive marginalization of groups that refused to depart from the past practices and continue with their early system of knowledge. Now, one basic definition of modernity is a life world practices that rationalizes your life world, that rationalizes according to scientific reason, not according to your belief and custom and your faith. So, as long as you retain your belief, custom and faith and your lifestyle practices, you are still considered non-modern, non-rational, non-scientific. So, as long as they resist this and retain their past practices in the present form of living, they particularly form a category called subordinate, the marginal, the primitive, the backward. Now, the concern here is the concern of my paper is not to take them as someone to be treated as different, culturally different, hence have to be assimilated, hence have to be so-called socially included. The social inclusion thing that he was mentioning, Professor Sabyasachi was mentioning, is all about mainstreamizing the marginal. Now, who are these marginal? Who thinks, and we realize that actually when we are faced with this crisis of not having clean air to breathe, clean water to drink, enough diverse food production or seeds to produce our food organically, we realize that actually it is this Adivasi, it is these indigenous people who have been not only maintaining the forest cover, not only maintaining the clean air where they're in their regions of habitation, not only retaining the clean water in the river, not only safeguarding the natural resources, the natural forest resources, the water resources, land resources, they also know how to heal through their knowledge of plants in their regions of habitation. So they also have the knowledge of, community knowledge of medicinal properties of their plants. And yesterday Sabyasachi pointed out how through ethnobotany the modern world is appropriating their knowledge on plants. The Adivasi, the indigenous, non-modern, non-scientific knowledge on plants, and he gave such a wonderful example of how they came to know the chemical properties of plants without the laboratories. So the ethnobotany of the modern science is appropriating that, accepting and appropriating, but at the same time continuing with this label of marginalized, primitive, backward, scheduled tribe, need to be uplifted, brought into the mainstream, and there has to be a social inclusion and inclusive growth. The whole idea is to make you think, shall we keep parroting these words of social inclusion, or shall we stop our own program of modernizing and start learning from them? Rather ask them to include them, ask ourselves into their way of thinking. Can they do it? Perhaps not. So I think this is a way of hammering or raising questions on certain categories of inclusion, inclusive growth. Whose growth? He just showed you what growth means. Yesterday you also saw what growth, GDP, leads to environment. So whose growth? Your growth, my growth, the plant's growth, or the growth of the SUVs and the models and the mobile industry, and so on and so forth. Stuff which you don't need initially, but you now need very badly, because the entire logic of capitalist production will tell you this is your ultimate need. Maybe I can digress a bit and say that the ultimate progress of technological society or software industry has come down to defining your progress as how fast you can order your banana or apple through your thumb. Is this modern? Is this progress? Or is this what you actually need being a modern citizen? That if you, through your power of your thumb, can bring the apple and banana from the store right at your doorstep, you are the most cool guy. Just think about it. And for that, we have invested thousands of money through IITs and NITs and whatnots and Ivy League industry invests to sit through the laboratories, develop microchips to what we call development. And these microchips will finally allow you to get that particular special brand of ice cream through the press of your thumb. And because of that ice cream and that particular consumption, you have to again register yourself into another gymnasium with certain amount of money to get rid of your fat. And then again you have to do this through some medical insurances so that you don't have heart attack or any other kind of thing, heart diseases or health diseases. This is our definition of modern. This is our definition of progress. This is our definition of scientific. This has come to a hilarious level of understanding. But we have stopped questioning. We have stopped questioning. We really think that we were unsmart till we got our smartphone. Actually, we have all become non-thinking, robotic people with smartphone. But nobody questions, because that is one pattern of reason being fed into it, and your reasoning has stopped. Our reasoning has stopped, not you. but I can still say that because I still don't have a smartphone, but I have been told that you are the most unsmart person. So this is not at all a presentation on smartphone, but forgive me, and today I feel that it's not a big, we are not much constrained on time, but so I could really make that digression. Well, coming back to the argument that we really don't need this social inclusion model. We need to learn from them, as simple as that. Why I say this? Let me take just a quick example of two quick stories from a Limbu Eastern Himalayan community in Sikkim, or some of the lecture communities in and around Sikkim and Darjeeling, about their community knowledge, about their oral scriptures, about their collective way of living, and that will just give us another way of thinking, or help us to think differently, perhaps. Enumerated as one of the Indian languages of education in regional schools and colleges, the tribal literature of Limbu language presents a condition where the tribal citizen, I use the word tribal citizen off and on, tribal citizen is bringing in a knowledge system that is heavily borrowed from their oral narratives, from their oral scripture called Muntu. Now, what they are doing, they are bringing the transliterated, they are transcribing their oral literature, oral scriptures into textbooks, because Sikkim government has recognized this as one of the languages of the school as well as college. Now, where do they produce the textbook materials from? What they are doing, they are heavily depending on their oral scriptures, oral narratives called Muntums, to transliterate, transcribe and reproduce them in the form of text. So there is a larger argument I am producing that as tribal citizens, they are living a life of border thinking. They're combining the modern with non-modern. But that's not the focus of this debate or my paper here. The transcribed oral narrative in the textbook say certain examples. The textbooks that I read and researched say that the primitive men became cultivators with the help of a wise sparrow. You get these kind of stories from every tribal or cultural communities. But let me give it, since it appeared in the class 8 textbook of CBSE textbook or Sikkim government textbook in Limbu literature. So the tribal men or the pastoralists started learning agriculture, became cultivators with the help of a wise sparrow who had taught them how to cultivate forested lands. Because before that, they were what is called as Jhum cultivation. They were practicing that. But this wise sparrow told them how to, this pattern of cultivation, what the sparrow is telling them, is but a process of Jhum cultivation. Now, this story that the sparrow telling the man how to save seeds and how to throw them back into the forested land by cutting them and burning them and leaving that land fallow once you grow your own food and move on to some another region, but how you in the process save the seeds that had produced food for you in the previous year. All on one condition, that human beings will never kill sparrow in exchange of this knowledge, that is how to cultivate land. Because before that, Limbu said that our ancestors were only living on tubers and roots and on producers of the forest, and once there is a drought or once there is too much cold, we were dying hungry, and the sparrow taught us how to do cultivation. But on one condition, that you are not going to kill a single sparrow from now on, because men were hunters and gatherers and they were killing all kinds of birds as well. So please don't kill us, and I am giving you the knowledge. Now this tradition is strictly maintained among the Limbu cultivators, they claim. And even when their crops get destroyed by hordes of invading small birds, including sparrow, they never ever try and destroy or kill the small birds or sparrow. Now there is an interesting link, because with the vanishing population of sparrows in the urban centers, the modern world or the modern urban people have lately awakened to the scientific community on the urgent need of the sparrow protection or the small bird protection. But here is a community which is doing the sparrow protection because of certain oral tradition and oral narrative, and that they have transcribed it in a textbook. Similarly, the rapid reader textbook of class 9 and 10 contains a significant transcription of Feng Shui or the Mundhum on the origin of flowers and their significance in this world. Now, these are all non-rational knowledge, non-biological knowledge. According to this oral tradition, the supreme goddess of wisdom had first created the earthscape of Himalaya, because they are talking about their region of habitation. The earthscape of Himalaya, followed by the hills and rivers. First she created the earthscape, then she came with hills and rivers. But the forest and the creepers and the big trees did not yet look beautiful to her. The goddess had started creating one after another, the Himalaya, the rivers, the forests, but it was not coming as beautiful to her. So she created animal world for the forest. And then it was for the bees in the forest that she had to create flowers. Not from the flowers, the germination, pollination, and the kind of logic of biology that we were taught, that the plant world came into being, but for the flowers, for the bees in the forest, she created flowers so that the bees can survive. Now, finally, when flowers came, she became happy. The goddess became happy, and she felt that her creation now looks beautiful enough because there are flowers in the forest. At last, the goddess was happy, and for the flowers offered her with the aesthetic beauty that she was searching for in her own creation. Now, this ancient Limbu belief, as narrated through its oral tradition of Mundhum, is a purely unrelated course of event, was upheld in the language of scientific knowledge too. A recent publication of biological research has almost endorsed this aspect of Limbu cosmology, or the story of their origin in the Mundhumi oral scripture, as the British professor of biology Dave Golson narrates a similar story of chronological evolution of forest, bees, and then flowers, albeit scientifically in his book Sting in the Tail in 2013. Now, when it comes to this traditional primitive people of the Eastern Himalaya, when they say that सब कुछ आ गया था, जंगल भी बन गया था, सारे जंगल के एनिमल्स भी थे, लेकिन फ्लावर्स नहीं थे, बीज के लिए फ्लावर्स बनाए गए, तो हम कहेंगे कि ऐसे ही कुछ भी कहानी मनगढ़ंत कह देते हैं. So when it is getting also, corroborated or substantiated by the researchers on bees, and say that as a food for the bees, flowers actually evolved, or the researcher on bees kind of substantiate these kind of knowledge as the evolutionary knowledge on flowers and bees. However, the Limbu textbook's transcription of Mundhum on flowers goes on to further narrate that even the creation of flowers had followed a chronology. Now, in their textbook, we find that the flowers have a chronology, which flower came first and which flower came later. I won't go into the detail because I had written for my paper earlier. Now, these transcriptions from oral narratives, it may be pointed out here, are instrumental in imparting different ecological sensitivities among the students of the language, that is the Limbu language, based on oral scripts, oral narratives, rather than the students of botany and biology in schools in Sikkim. Now, even if botanical explanation of the same are also offered by the curriculum of modern sciences, it would be limited information in comparison to the vast, varied species of plants found in the region of Himalaya. The scientific knowledge would also remain limited to those few students who opt for natural sciences for their higher degrees. Whereas, having oral knowledge or Mundhumi knowledge, any Limbu community member will come to know about the diversity of the flowers in the Eastern Himalayan region through their chronological evolution and their elementary property each flower is meant to do. And they all have, each flower has some aesthetic value, for instance, Sekmuri is a flower which symbolizes, celebrates life. Mikchiri represents the completion of life, that is death. So each flower has an aesthetic value. And that's how an ordinary, illiterate Limbu will know the relevance and the sustenance of each flower in the Eastern Himalayan zone. So it makes even an illiterate member of the community much knowledgeable about the innumerable species of flowers and birds and their ecological relevance for the natural habitation of Eastern Himalaya. So this Adivasi alternate lifehold practices, which I like to call as political alterity, as this paper suggests, is marked by both conscious agency and contingent positioning of the marginalized vis-a-vis the national model. They are negotiating with the national model, with their textbook, with their modern curriculum, with their modern CBSE curriculum, but with the knowledge that has been brought through oral text. So this is a conscious, contingent political decision. The Adivasi worldview is the alternate understanding of our ecological existence. It has to be, the argument is, it has to be followed and adopted and learned from, rather than represented for social inclusion, or mainstream them in the name of mainstreaming the backward. Similarly, the lecture intervention in nurturing biodiversity in this highly biodiverse region of Eastern Himalaya, in many ways introducing the ethical/political in the cultural debate. Their ecological prudence is most vivid in the emotional bonding with the non-human world, be it high altitude lakes, mountains, springs, rivers, females of the wild animal species, rare breed of animal, and system of sparing a portion of edible roots in the soil. The philosophy and practice of Sim Aniur Un makes them knowledgeable about how to remove the toxic content of edible plants and teaches them about as many as 228 varieties of edible plants, whereas the larger modern society is dependent on a mere number of 7 species of plant sources. However, by the logic and irony of governmental modernization, lectures, the traditional inhabitant of Sikkim, North Sikkim, have recently acquired the level of primitive tribe, even as the zone of their habitation year after year gets identified as the richest zone of biodiversity in one of the richest zones of biodiversity in the entire world. Now, it is up to you which pattern of reason you follow and which model you follow. Yeah, so I'll just So the need for engaging with the lifehold practices of the dominated, of the marginalized, of the backward communities the world over arises from the enormous diversity of ecological, artistic and intellectual riches that these self-governing communities have nurtured over centuries. The indigenous community articulates through its lived experience what it means by non-modern culture, prevalent among many cultural communities the world over, be it the Maoris in New Zealand, the Zapatistas in Mexico or the Adivasis in India. Cultural relativism is apparently strived for in the underlying sentiments of we have our own reason of doing things the way we do, but since you don't share the fundamentals of our worldview, you will never come to understand or appreciate those reasons, therefore leave us alone and let us mind our own business. In situations such as this, the liberal understanding of accommodating diversity or integrating difference through representation appears inadequate, as the minoritized indigenous or the marginalized indigenous stand for the singularity of the singular, and that can neither be assimilated or represented within the homogeneous time and space of the modern nation state. Thank you.
Thank you for that. It's a very, very rich, meticulously detailed paper, bringing to life Eastern Himalayan kingdoms. Women and